have ASL interpreters here. We have ASL interpreters here today. We also have a CART captioner. So if you need captioning, you can go ahead and turn that on. I am going to try to make my presentation pretty brief so that we have lots of time for questions at the end, because I think that a lot of the gold here is going to be kind of in questions and discussion. So I will go ahead and start my. All right. So as I said, I'm Julia O'Leary. I'm the General Counsel here at Mass Office on Disability. And we're going to talk about accessible job postings and interview processes, kind of in the spirit of the National Disability Employment Awareness Month. You know, we want to make sure that we as Commonwealth agencies are hiring people with disabilities, and in order to do that effectively, we need to make sure that they are able to get in the door, right? So how do we make our job, our hiring process more accessible to people with disabilities? All right, so we're going to talk about how the ADA applies to the hiring process. Then we're going to talk about what the ADA coordinator's role is, because I think that sometimes there's a little, confusion about what the ADA coordinator's role might be, both on the part of the ADA coordinator and on the part of HR and recruitment staff. Then some sort of brief overview of considerations for job postings, considerations for interviews, and then I really want some good opportunity for discussion, and I'll send out some resources afterwards so that you have the pretty links. So when we talk about how the ADA applies to the hiring process, we need to break the hiring process down into 3 phases, because the law applies differently at different stages of the process. So when you're in the pre-offer stage, so that's sort of up until you've made an offer for employment, you cannot ask any disability-related questions or require any medical exams unless you're doing so for affirmative action purposes. So not every sort of medical exam counts as a medical exam. You can require like a physical fitness test that doesn't count under the ADA as a medical exam, but you can't require people to answer disability-related questions before you have offered them employment. And the reason for that is that we don't want to create an opportunity where discrimination could occur. So, there are biases against people with disabilities, and you want to make sure that you're not setting yourself up for the opportunity to discriminate. You can ask people to voluntarily self-identify as a person with a disability for affirmative action purposes. That is not prohibited by the ADA. I mean, we do that, on Mass Careers on the self-identification form. Post-offer is where you have sort of the most flexibility in terms of what you can ask the applicant. You can ask them to answer disability-related questions or submit to a medical exam, but only if all applicants are asked the same questions and they're related to the job, right? So it kind of opens up there that you can condition that offer of employment on being able to answer certain disability related questions or submitting to a medical exam. That is allowed. And it closes up a little bit more. Once they begin employment, you can ask disability related questions if necessary to support a request for reasonable accommodation, or if there is objective evidence that the employee is unable to perform the job successfully or safely because of a medical condition. So that might happen in a situation where you have an employee that operates heavy machinery and you notice that they've started falling asleep on the job. You could ask for medical documentation, then obviously because there's a safety risk, but otherwise you're limited to only asking disability related information in response to a request for accommodation. And I mean, it should go without saying, but the ADA prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in hiring. So when you're asking these questions, that is considered discrimination under the Americans with Disabilities Act. There's a question in the chat whether the safety risk is only in reference to the safety of the employee or to the public or the people the department serves, and it's all of them. It's a sort of safety to the employee or to others. You can ask disability related questions if there is a safety risk either to the employee themselves, to other employees, or to members of the public. So the ADA coordinator's role in the hiring process is to support the agency, so both the recruitment staff and hiring managers, in making job postings that are going to attract people with disabilities and that are accessible to people with disabilities, to advise on accommodations that might be necessary for certain applicants to participate in interviews or other aspects of the hiring process, and to respond to those requests for accommodations from applicants. So the ADA coordinator does have a role in the hiring process. It is really helpful for the ADA coordinator to take a look at job postings to make sure that they're written in a way that's inclusive. It is incredibly essential that the ADA coordinator be aware of jobs that are being posted so that the ADA coordinator can advise the hiring manager, can advise recruitment staff on how to make that application process accessible, and also so that they can anticipate, oh, I'm going to need to be prepared to respond for requests for reasonable accommodation from applicants. So it's important that there's a good line of communication between the ADA coordinators and the recruitment team so that they are aware of and can be involved in the process. When you are thinking about making a job posting accessible, one thing that we as ADA coordinators talk a lot about are essential versus non-essential job functions. And it's really helpful if you put only the essential job functions, or you focus, and distinguish between the essential and non-essential job functions in your job postings. I say this in my ADA coordinator training, but when courts are considering what are the essential functions of someone's job, they really like to look at the job posting. What did you tell the world this position was going to do when you were going out and hiring for it? So it's important for that reason, but it's also important so that a person with a disability can make an advanced determination of, yeah, I could do that job with reasonable accommodations, or they might say, sounds like there are some essential parts of this job that I don't think I could do even with accommodations, or, that would sort of prevent me from doing the job, and sort of use their judgment then about whether or not this is a job that they want to apply for. And sort of when job postings are vague about what the essential functions are, it's harder to make that analysis, and it might send a message to a potential applicant of, I don't know if this job is going to really work for me. It's really helpful to eliminate sort of functions or qualifications that might be discriminatory. And we see this a lot. We used to see it a lot more. I've been seeing it less in more recent hiring, but 10 years ago, it was really common to see a driver's license as a requirement for desk jobs in the state. So when I was, when I first came to state government 10 years ago, one of the qualifications to be a Council 1 was that you needed a valid driver's license. Now, I didn't need to drive as a Council 1. Sometimes I needed to travel, but it's helpful to distinguish between what the end result is. So, do you need to be able to get from point A to point B, or do you actually need to physically drive? Now, there's some jobs in the state where driving is an essential part of the job. Maybe a park ranger needs to be able to drive the ranger's truck around the park. And so that would be an essential function for that job, an essential qualification for that job. And a driver's license would be appropriate to list on the job posting. But think about, what is really necessary. Sometimes people will put excellent verbal communication skills, and that those verbal communication skills might not actually need to be verbal. Maybe they're just excellent communication skills, and someone who is deaf and speaks primarily through ASL isn't going to have excellent verbal communication skills necessarily, but they might have excellent communication skills in writing or via ASL. So, you want to be careful about how you're characterizing these skills and qualifications so that you're not inadvertently using exclusionary language. It's really helpful to flag different aspects of flexibility in the job that might make a job more attractive to candidates with disabilities. People with disabilities, know what they need in order to succeed in their job, and knowing that there is flexibility on the part of the employer is going to make your organization more attractive to them as an applicant. So if it's a hybrid position or a fully remote position, advertise that, let people know, because, or if conversely, if it's a position that's entirely in person in an office, or another site, let people know that in the job posting so that they can self-select about whether that's going to be a good fit for them. Maybe your agency offers flex time. That might be really attractive to certain candidates with disabilities. And then the most important thing is to always include the ADA coordinator's contact information. And this is sort of built into HRCMS, but it's really important that folks know how to ask for accommodations, and that the ADA coordinator is prepared to respond to those requests for accommodations. And so what kind of accommodations might be necessary? We are going to talk about that in sort of considerations for interviews. So when folks who are applicants are asking for reasonable accommodations, they are not going to be using the ServiceNow platform. They're going to be contacting you directly by phone or email normally. So you need to have a system in place for responding to reasonable accommodation requests for the application process. And this goes beyond interviews. Like if there's other aspects of the accommodation process that maybe somebody needs an accommodation for, this goes for that as well. So, make sure that you have a system for tracking this and making sure that you're responding to these requests for accommodation. Just as you would for current employees, you want to keep any information about reasonable accommodations that are requested separate from the hiring file. And you don't want to be telling the hiring manager, so-and-so is a person with a disability and they've asked for an accommodation, right? Because you are violating confidentiality requirements of the ADA. So, confidentiality rules still apply, sort of segregation of records still apply. And, be thoughtful about how you're going to handle this. It's, really important that you and the hiring manager come up with a plan for how you're going to handle requests for accommodation. If somebody needs a sign language interpreter, you need to be planning ahead and booking that ASL interpreter, well in advance of when the interview is going to take place, so that you're not sort of unfairly disadvantaging a deaf applicant because they're going to get interviewed 2 weeks later than everybody else. So think about who you're anticipating applying. Obviously, you're not going to know right away who your applicant pool is going to be, but sort of have a plan in place for how you're going to triage these requests and how you're going to make sure that everyone is on an even playing field and with the accommodations they need. And that's why it's so important to respond to requests promptly, because you do not want the reasonable accommodation process to slow down the hiring process. That is going to upset your hiring managers and your recruitment staff. And it's going to unfairly disadvantage applicants with disabilities. And the whole purpose is to, all of our common goal right now is to increase hiring of people with disabilities. So, make sure that you're responding to these requests promptly. And, when you're evaluating these reasonable accommodation requests, you're going to be treating them more like Title II requests. I mean, you're under Title I, but you're going to have more of that arm's length transaction that you would with Title II. So you're not going to be gathering extensive medical documentation. You might need some in order to justify the accommodation, but you probably aren't going to be requesting the same amount of medical documentation that you would for an employee, because it's not necessary. It's a pretty brief interaction, and you want to be getting through these requests efficiently so that the hiring process can continue. So I think this is the first time that this has ever happened, but I'm having most of this training be an opportunity for questions. I see that I already have a question in the chat. If I can figure out how to look at the chat. But if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the chat. I think it's, this is an area where I get a lot of questions. And so I wanted to give folks the opportunity to hear each other's questions, ask me questions that they might have, and see what you guys are sort of encountering as barriers in this process. So one question that is in the chat is, would it be possible to update the Form 30 template so that it uses categories of essential and non-essential functions? That's a good question. I don't know. That's a HRD question. That's something we could definitely raise with them. But I think I think the Form 30 really does focus on the essential functions of people's of people's jobs. And generally, you know, I recommend to ADA coordinators that we use that Form 30 as part of the analysis when deciding what someone's essential job functions are. So I think, you know, if there's specific recommendations about tweaks to the Form 30, I would bring that to HRD. Are there any other questions? I purposefully made this a short slide deck so that people would actually have time for questions, because I know normally I drone on and on. No questions? All right, I'll give you guys a minute to think about questions. Oh, here we have some positions. Yeah, I see this now. We have some positions that require forced overtime. That would be something we would post as essential. There's actually just a recent appeals court decision on mandatory overtime. I would put in your job posting, if mandatory overtime is part of the job, I would make that really clear in the job posting. And if you are having issues with mandatory overtime at your and reasonable accommodations to be exempted from it at your agency, let's chat, because there is no case law on that. All right, so follow-up question. We had someone who said that they would only be able to work a day shift for unit that is 24/7, 3-shift unit. The shifts are assigned based on seniority. Should we post that too? You could, you definitely could. I think, you know, the more information that you can provide about what someone can expect with respect to the job is helpful, right? Because you're advertising yourself as an employer in your job posting. So if you think that that is going to help people self-select about whether or not this agency is a good fit for them, I think it would be helpful. You don't need to go into that level of detail. And, you know, people can ask for accommodations once they take the job. So I would, you know, I would use your discretion about how big a part of the job, you know, that these you know, these issues are going to be. You know, if shifts are assigned based on seniority, that might be something really helpful to flag for people so that they understand that they don't necessarily have control over what shift they're going to be working. That said, you know, a reasonable accommodation would be, you know, reasonable accommodations can change that. And so if somebody needed a different schedule because of their disability, they could request that as a reasonable accommodation. And you would have to consider whether or not that request was reasonable, right, in your particular circumstances. So if there's like a specific scenario you're thinking of, we can definitely connect offline about it, dig into it a little bit more. One question that I think comes up sometimes is, we have an employee who has applied for an internal posting. Do we treat them as an applicant or an employee? You're going to treat them as an applicant. other questions that people might have, but they don't want to ask in front of the group. I mean, I think one question is, you know, how do we support when there's these confidentiality requirements, how do we support a diverse applicant pool without outing people as being people with disabilities, which you're not allowed to do because that's illegal. And I think what you're going to do is, you know, a lot of ADA coordinators are also diversity officers. What you want is to have, you know, the diversity officer sort of as they do routinely offer up a pool of candidates that, you know, meet the MERS for the position, that, you know, get that AA status in whatever form without identifying specifically, you know, this is a person with a disability. Here's a question for the driver's license example. We recently removed driver's license from the MERS to an updated travel requirement. However, it can be a challenge when it comes to reimbursement for Uber and rideshare services. So interested in how other agencies are handling. Has anybody encountered you know, reimbursement for Uber or other rideshare services as a reasonable accommodation, and they want to weigh in, or do you want me to give my 2 cents? Okay, quiet group today. Jennifer, what's the challenge there? Is it just that it is expensive, that it requires more paperwork? What's the barrier that you're running into?
Yeah, so I think it's just a challenge to, as we move to no longer requiring a driver's license and access to an automobile, which was previously our requirements, to moving to an updated travel requirement that requires that you get on site as scheduled. But some of the locations are easily available off public transportation, whereas others aren't. And there isn't necessarily anything in the union contract, at least for our agency, that talks about how to reimburse when it comes to Uber and rideshare. And it can be a challenge as some employees may need to use transportation services and other employees may just not have a vehicle.
I would treat it, and it's like so awkward where, you know, these reasonable accommodations kind of butt up against union issues. I would treat it like any other reimbursement request. So, you know, you get your receipt for the Uber drive that shows the starting and ending location, and just process it as a regular reimbursement. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it gets to the bigger question of we've removed the driver's license requirement, but now we can get candidates that have a medical reason for not having a driver's license, but we also have candidates that simply don't. So there isn't an accommodation in place.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. So they don't. Well, I don't know if you're really required to. I mean, if the person needs the transportation for a disability, I think you need to provide it. If they don't have, you know, a car and they need the transportation for some other reason that isn't disability related, yeah, I don't know if you need to reimburse for that. I would check with your labor team because you might not need to. Well, maybe you need to, but I don't know.
I don't have to do
labor relations anymore. So.
Yeah, and I'm posing the question because I know that you had brought up the driver's license example, and I think it's just something down the road that
Yeah,
I
it is
think
something
that
to
it
think about.
the driver's license didn't need to be in our MERS because our job is not, an essential function of our job is not to drive a vehicle.
Right.
But it has created some interesting questions down the line.
Yeah, yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, for people who need to get from point A to point B, but don't have a disability. Yeah, that's a good point. Any other questions? So quiet today, you guys. I guess this is why I normally talk so much at meetings. Well, I'm here if if you're running into an issue and you want to chat about it. We really do want to make sure that we're sort of thinking about how we're going to create work environments that are attractive to people with disabilities so that they want to come and work for the Commonwealth. I know that this is a really important issue for this administration to increase our diversity in hiring, particularly around disability. So when you're thinking about the jobs that you're creating, the jobs that you're posting, keep in mind what you can do to make that job more attractive to folks with disabilities. What kind of supports can you provide to incumbents of that position? And how can you sort of sell that in your job posting so that people know that this is going to be a good place for them to work? Because we want the Commonwealth to have diversity in employment and be a welcoming place for people with disabilities. So one comment in the chat is a barrier is that we have to base our descriptions on the classification specifications for each series negotiated with the unions. And that's true. That's absolutely true. There's room to flesh out though what the expectations are for the position and what the agency is willing to offer in terms of flexibility. You do get some narrative flexibility in your job postings to explain, to give some color to what that position is going to be. The job classification specs are really bare bones and often don't really give you an idea about what a particular position is going to do, right? I mean, every agency has PC1s, and those PC1s are going to do a huge range of different tasks in their jobs, and they're going to have pretty diverse job conditions too. And so even though it's a PC1 position, so the qualifications are set by that job spec, you can think about what that person's going to do in their job and how you can describe that in a way that's going to be either attractive or unattractive to people who are considering applying to the job. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, we will end this training. Thank you guys all for taking the time to come today. And please reach out to me if you have questions about this. If you are, trying to problem solve, a specific situation, I'm happy to be a sounding board. And we really want to make sure that we are being aggressive in our hiring of people with disabilities. So happy to support that in any way that we can. All right, take care.
Thanks, Julia.
Thanks.